way to do it. Okay, so if this is your first time here, Support for Family has been around for 40 years and has provided services, resources, and information for families of children with disabilities or with special care needs. We are going to talk about a little bit more the resource and the information that Support for Families provide. But before that, a few important notes. During these presentations, we are going to put some links into the chat. This is going to be amazing information that Case provide for the families today. And also at the end, you are going to find a quick survey. It's an evaluation that founders ask to see the result and the impact that our workshops and work has in the community. So please take a few minutes to fill it out. Also, at the end of the presentation, we will share the slides for those families that want. Super important is that this presentation is going to be recorded. So please try to not use personal names. Try to keep it everything generic and confidential, because we never know where this going to be. This presentation probably is going to be on YouTube, so it's super important to not say personal names or the name of the school. And also super important to make this presentation accessible for all, that please stay mute and you can put every question into the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we are going to respond your questions. Having said that, Lee, all yours. I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you so much, Flavia, and thank you everyone for being here with us tonight at CASE. You have many different places you could be, and we are so excited that you're here with us. We hope this turns out to be time well spent. So Flavia, if you could please go to the next slide. So we've got a jam-packed agenda here for you tonight. We'll talk a little bit about CASE and support for families, just a little bit, and then we'll get right into understanding your rights and your students' rights. What are those procedural safeguards that that thick 20-page packet you get handed at the beginning of the school year or at your first IEP meeting of the year? And then we'll leave time for questions. And believe it or not, we're going to have to rush to get through all of that. So we'll move right along. Next slide, please. All right, well, I'm not going to read the slides word for word, but we've all heard or said things like this, oh my gosh, I've been asking for help at my kid's school for ages, the staff doesn't listen to me. This doesn't sound right. I need help. So this is the start of that. Next slide, please. So at CASE, we are the Community Alliance for Special Education. We are about the same age as Support for Families. We were founded in the 70s. We're more than 40 years old. And the mission of CASE is to help families access high quality public education services for their students with disabilities. And we also believe that no one should be turned away from services for their because of their income, because of their home language, because of their immigration status. None of that matters to us. We work with families to make sure that students get their services in school. Next slide, please.
And we are Support for Families of Children with Disabilities. As I said, Support for Families has been around since 1982 and has provided support for families to children with all disabilities or with special care needs. We have support group for parents, for youth. We provide one-to-one support through our family resource specialists who can connect you with various resource events. We have a peer-to-peer parent mentor program, and we offer ongoing workshops such as tonight's presentations. Remember that we provide services in many languages. So if you call the warm line, someone in Cantonese or Spanish or English, it could be there to support you. During this presentation, we are going to share our calendar and a website, because we have different workshops, trainings, and events super fun and super useful for families to build a huge community here in the San Francisco area. So thank you, Lee, for giving me a space to share our services.
Anytime. I'm a product of the services of Support for Families, so I'm always excited to be back here working with Support for Families. When my now high school senior was in kindergarten and we realized that he wasn't going to be able to access his education without special education services, Support for Families was a huge part of my journey. Everything from those support groups to parent mentors to becoming a parent mentor, all the trainings. And here I am now, not just a client, but now a presenter. All right, next slide. Oh, and so we talked about this a little bit. So much to get from Support for Families. So next slide, please. At CASE, feel free to reach out to us. We do free 1-hour consultations. The link to our intake form is in the chat. Thank you very much for sharing it, Jojo. And that's how we start the process. So if you're interested in learning more after tonight, please reach out and we're happy to schedule a consultation. Next slide, please. And also, we have co-authored with Disability Rights California, the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. Highly encourage everyone. I highly encourage folks to check this out. It's available in multiple languages online. And it's written very easy to read in frequently asked questions format. Find the chapter about whatever it is you're interested in learning more about. Pick out the question. Oh, I didn't even know I needed to ask that question. You click on it and it takes you right to the answers with the ed code citations. And that's really important because when you're communicating with your school and they see that you're referencing ed code, they know you're serious. It takes it up another level. So it's a great resource. Next slide, please. All right, let's get into those rights. All right, Karma, this is where I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lee. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Karma Quick Panwala, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at CASE. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. So let's dive into the IDEA, alphabet soup. What you are looking at is a very confusing map of how special education works. So we're going to help you understand this map tonight. And we're probably going to give you some easier maps to read and understand your rights and your students' rights as well. Let's move on to the next slide. These laws in front of you are all of the laws that apply to your child's education at school. The first one is the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. You've probably heard of this one quite a few times before. It is a federal law. This is the federal law implemented starting in the mid-1970s that applies to special education specifically in our public schools today. Next, below that is the California Education Code. The California Education Code is the state law that helps implement or put into action the IDEA at the state level. It's slightly different from the federal law, and we will make sure we point out those differences to you tonight and the next 3 times that we'll be presenting. Underneath the Education Code is the Federal Education Records Privacy Act. This is what keeps a student's information, everything from their personal contact information to their report cards, to their attendance, to their IEP, and every piece of paper that has their name on it at school, confidential. There's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504 was the very first federal disability rights law in the nation. And there's also a part of Section 504 that pertains to educating students with disabilities in our schools. However, there's a difference between Section 504 and the IDEA. Also applicable is Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We often think of the ADA as applying to wheelchair ramps, braille for people who are blind, or maybe the size of a bathroom or an accessible parking spot. However, the ADA requires so much more than that. But we're not here to talk about the ADA or the Lanterman Act, which is a California law, the McKinney-Vento Act, another California law, or Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which helps ensure parents' rights to language access in this process and non-discrimination on the basis of nationality, religion, ethnicity, race, and more. Let's move on. Here is one time in this presentation where I really want you to take out your phone and take a picture of this slide. We are showing you this slide multiple times throughout this presentation. This is the map of the IEP process. First of all, we need to figure out what the students' needs are in school. And we do that by looking at the assessments that are taken as part of the special education process, their grades, test scores, behavior reports, observations, and information from independent service providers. That information tells us if the student needs goals in special education. Goals take a look at all areas of need at school: academic, social emotional, behavior, adaptive and daily living skills, and goals have to be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable and ambitious, relevant, and time-bound. Once we have our goals, we take a look at the services that are needed to make sure the goals can be put into place and worked on and addressed by the student and the school staff. The services have to be individualized. That's super important. Remember that. The services can also include accommodations. It can also be adult support, like an aid. It could be related services and therapies, like physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech. It can be specialized academic instruction, which is what you think of with a special education teacher, and counseling or consultation with outside service providers. Once we have all this information in front of us, the needs, the goals, and the services, and we can determine all of that in the IEP, that's when we talk about placement. And what is so important to remember, in this process, placement is not a physical location. Placement is the equivalent of FAPE. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So here are the important concepts under the IDEA, that federal special education law. There are 3 concepts, and I just mentioned one of them, FAPE. But the first one, and probably one of the most important, is child find. Schools must find and evaluate students suspected of having disabilities at no cost to their parents. After that quote is a citation, you'll see 34 CFR 300.114. That CFR means it is the federal law. So anytime you see 34 CFR 300 point something, you know we're talking about the federal regulations of the IDEA. The second most important concept is FAPE. A free, appropriate public education must be available to all children residing in the state between the ages of 3 and 21 inclusive, including children with disabilities who have been suspended or expelled from school. And again, you see that 34 CFR 300 there, which means that comes from the federal law as well. And the third most important concept is LRE, the least restrictive environment. Children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled, and special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular educational environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with non-disabled students with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. Again, you see 34 CFR 300 there, so you know this is coming from federal law. Okay, let's move on. All right, awesome. So we have these three concepts. How do they apply? Child find means that the school district must locate, identify, and evaluate all students in that school district's geographic boundary. This includes all children who are suspected of having a disability. The keyword here is suspected. We're not only going to identify them as having a disability before we do the assessment. This can include children who are suspected of having a disability, including children who receive passing grades and are advancing from grade to grade. So students who seem to do well in school and seem to get good grades can still be eligible for special education, and schools cannot tell parents that students don't qualify for special education simply because their grades are quote unquote good. Child find and the IDEA applies to students in private, parochial, and charter schools as well. So what questions would we ask at an IEP meeting or of the school team about child find? I see my child struggling with math or reading or writing or their behavior. What assessments are included in an assessment plan to determine whether my kid's struggles are related to a disability? Or dyslexia runs in our family. Are there assessments you can perform that will give us additional information in this area? Or maybe my child was just diagnosed with ADHD by his doctor. Are there additional executive function assessments that you can perform during his triennial assessment to help us understand this? All right, next slide. FAPE. So what is FAPE? It means that everything at school related to a child's education is free and provided at no cost to the family. It also must be individualized to meet that student's unique needs. It provides educational benefit for that student, and it prepares students for further education, employment, and independent living after they complete high school or transition program and are done with secondary education. So a few notes about FAPE. The IEP is the roadmap that describes how we will monitor progress and what services are needed to provide FAPE. Now, when you think about free, appropriate public education, it's so important to remember that appropriate doesn't mean the best. Appropriate means what is just right for that student so they can make progress at their own level and at their own rate. In fact, some of the case law in special education says that appropriate means appropriately ambitious, that students with disabilities can make progress in light of the progress that their non-disabled peers are making as well. So any public institution that accepts federal or state money must follow this law. Let's move on. Okay, some questions and framing about how you can address these concerns for a FAPE. I see that you're offering the same services to my student as every other student in the classroom. How is this individualized to meet my students' unique needs at school? Or in order to benefit from her education or receive FAPE, my child needs this particular service and it's based on the assessment that you just took, school district. Or tell me about my child's day. What does it look like when my child arrives at school and comes through the door, gets into the classroom, gets to their desk, and then begins their work. Walk me through each step of that day. What does the IEP look like in practice? Or how is the math goal being addressed in math class? How are you tracking that? Or I noticed my child has a low score in visual processing on the assessment that you did. Should there be an IEP goal in this area? Maybe you would ask, I cannot take my kid to school across town to the school that they need to attend. Will you provide transportation or reimburse me for Uber? Think about how you can frame those questions to the school district. Now, the least restrictive environment, that third important principle under the IDEA. General education is the most or the least restrictive environment, but the general education classroom isn't always the most appropriate place for all students all of the time. There's a spectrum here. Remember, the law specifies that the least restrictive environment includes the use of supplementary aids and services. So as you take a look at this spectrum in front of us, we start on the left with the least specialized and least separate setting, the general education class only. Then we move to general education class with consultation or co-teaching. We move to an itinerant teacher, then to a resource teacher, then maybe to a self-contained special class, then maybe to a special day school, then maybe home hospital instruction, and finally the most specialized and the most separate setting is a residential school. As you look at this, just remember that the least restrictive environment, I'm sorry, could we go back to the previous slide? Thank you. Remember that needs drive goals and goals drive placement. The slide that I showed you just a few slides ago, that data and that information from the assessments, the grades, the report cards, the test scores, to figuring out what the student needs. All of that data and information is your friend when you are making the case for the least restrictive environment. Let's move on. Okay, so how do we clarify or start the conversation on the least restrictive environment? Here are some examples. Before we move my child out of his general education classroom and into a more restrictive environment because of his behaviors, why can't we try the use of supplementary aids, maybe a registered behavior technician? Or perhaps you would say, my child is being pulled out of their general education class for so much intervention during the day that they're missing most of the day with their peers. Is this really the least restrictive environment? Should we consider a placement with the interventions built into the classroom? Or maybe you would say, my child is already in the moderate severe SDC, and they're very social and they love spending time with their non-disabled peers. How about we find an elective class for them to attend so they have more time with their general education setting and with their non-disabled peers? These are examples of moving between the different environments and finding what the least restrictive environment for that student might be. Next slide, please. All right, procedural safeguards. Lee, tag, you're it.
Awesome. All right, ready to go. Okay, so if you've been in an IEP meeting, you've seen that big thick packet, or maybe when your teacher emails you your notice of meeting and maybe a draft of your IEP, you also get that big thick packet of procedural safeguards. I know most people don't get around to reading them, but there is a lot of really important information in here that we all need to understand. These are our rights. These are our guardrails. These are what protect us in this very overwhelming process. And special education is a process. It's not one meeting. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so understanding these rights as you follow the process is really, really beneficial. So What are your first two rights? They are to participate. You have we hear a lot, meaningful parental participation. And we as advocates do a lot of framing of that in meetings. No one calls an advocate into a meeting where things are going well, the team is agreeing, everything's great, kumbaya. We don't go into those kind of meetings. We get pulled into the meetings where the teams disagree. Parents don't feel like they're being heard. Things aren't going well. And so we do a lot of reminding teams that, hey, wait a minute. This parent, this guardian, this educational rights holder, this person here, they are a meaningful participant in this team. They have as much of a right to be heard and considered as anyone else in this room. To receive prior written notice. We're going to spend a lot more time on prior written notice here in a second, because I think this is one of the scariest procedural safeguards, one of the most misunderstood procedural safeguards, and also one of the most important. So Flavia, next slide, please. So meaningful parental participation, a couple examples. Perfect one that we see all the time is going into your triennial evaluation or your initial evaluation, and all of a sudden you've got service providers sending you a report or telling you that at the 1 hour triennial meeting, you're going to review all your reports. You're going to talk about new goals. You're going to talk about new services, and we're going to finalize the IEP and boom, be done. Has anyone, I don't know about the rest of you, but there's no way I could walk into a meeting, be handed a 20-page report, highly technical information, lots of scores, maybe some recommendations, go through that, fully understand it, fully process it, and then turn that information into goals and services, and do that with any authentic collaboration with the team. I know I couldn't, and I do this for a living. So that's not meaningful parental participation, to hand this stuff to a parent in the meeting and expect they're going to be able to digest it, listen to what other team members see, and still participate. No way. That's not realistic. So we frame it. We say, in order to meaningfully participate, please send these reports to the family 3, 5, whatever you need in order to take the time to digest it. Ask questions, do a little research. Google's your best friend and your worst enemy. And come into the meeting ready to ask questions and ready to participate. So that would be bullet point number 2. These assessments contain a lot of information. Please email me the draft reports 3 days ahead of time so I can review them and be a fully participating member of the team. Another way, that we see that parents need to sometimes assert their right to meaningfully participate is in even the setting of the meeting agenda. There's very much generally a sample agenda that special education departments hand to special education teachers, and they then turn around and hand that to parents, which is great, wonderful. It's a great starting place, but it's not the end all be all. If you have anything specific that you want to make sure is discussed during that agenda, you can ask. That's how meaningful participation, to put your information, your issues, your concerns, all of that into the meeting. So yeah, if there's a program that you don't understand that they're trying to put your child into, you can ask for more information. It is absolutely your right. In order to meaningfully participate, you need to know what's going on, and you need to have the time to participate. Next slide. And I think it's really important here. We think it's really important to point out the opposite of meaningful parental participation is predetermination. Predetermination is a big deal. It's a big no-no. The districts know it. They get slapped on the hand all the time for this. So we try and remind them that no, you can't just expect parents to go along. You can't expect families to just go along with whatever you say, to just get with the program, to assume that they're willing to put their child into a program because it's the best you've got, even if it's not appropriate for their kiddo. That's not what the IEP process is all about. The I in IEP is all about individualized. And so there's some tension in the process sometimes that families have to work through with school teams. And so we just remind them very often of their obligations to meaningfully participate with the families and not predetermine programs or outcomes. So next slide, please. All right, moving right along to prior written notice. Prior written notice is a little bit confusing. The prior always messes me up, but what we're talking about when we talk about prior written notice, it doesn't mean prior to a meeting. It just means that the district, prior to making any change, prior to doing anything, prior to moving along with the same and denying a parent's request, they have to, in writing, provide notice. So prior written notice, you should get a prior written notice anytime your child is going to be assessed, like a triennial. When you get that assessment plan, you should also get a prior written notice explaining what the district is doing or not doing. If you ask for a service, hey, wait a minute, my kid has apraxia and they have 1 speech session a week. I think maybe they should have 2 or 3, and those should be individualized instead of group, because that's best practices for apraxia, right? And they disagree. They should provide you a prior written notice explaining why they're denying those services. All right. So next slide, please. When you do get when you do get a prior written notice from the district, your prior written notice should have all of these 7 items in it. It should have a description of what the district is proposing to do or what they're refusing to do that you propose, an explanation of why, a description of what they use to determine their logic, and all of the other components here. I'm not going to read through them. I know we have a limited amount of time and we want to get to questions, but like we said before, anyone who wants copies of these slides, we're going to ask you at the end to put your email address into the chat. We'll capture that and we'll send you out a PDF of these slides. So you have all of this information, and there's more information about it also on the California Department of Education website, but we can help you find it if you need more. So if there's something that the team is proposing instead of what you are requesting, that should be in the prior written notice, and any other factors. So all of this should be in the prior written notice. So Flavia, next slide, please. Now, very often teams will say things in IEP meetings, or families will make requests and the teams will say, no, we're not going to do that. No, we don't agree. No, we don't have that resource to do that. Sorry, nope. Well, at that point, ask for a prior written notice. Always ask for the prior written notice. Hey, but wait a minute. I asked for this and you said no. Okay, we disagree. Please send me a prior written notice explaining why. And what we find very often at CASE is that when service providers are asked to put their logic, or sometimes lack thereof, into emails or into a PWN and send it out by email, and all of a sudden it's on the record that they said these things, they're less likely to use bad logic or make uninformed. They either will change their minds very often, or at least give a lot more information. But those prior written notices, having it in writing is really, really helpful, really, really beneficial. So one of the strategies for advocacy that we'll talk about in a later session is get everything in writing and put everything in writing. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. This is a protection for you. And if you ever do have to go to due process, if you ever do have to take that next step, file a compliance complaint, anything like that, having your written documentation is key. So always ask for that prior written notice, make them put it in writing. Always ask when you're going to be getting the prior written notice and by whom, how they're going to be delivering it. Get those details. Those are your right. It's your right to ask for more. It's your right to ask for clarification. You know, you are a fully participating member of the team. Next slide, please. All right, next couple of procedural safeguards that are really, really important. To consent, to refuse to consent, to be given a non-discriminatory assessment. Now, we're not going to talk as much about that last non-discriminatory assessment. That's next month. Part 2 of our four-part workshop, easy for me to say, is all about assessments. So we'll go into that in a lot more detail then. But that means in your home language, whatever language your student prefers, and in a way that takes their background and what they've been exposed to through life into account. It might potentially have to accommodate for their disability as well. So that's all I'm going to say about non-discriminatory assessment. I'm really going to focus here on consent and refuse to consent. Parents must be informed. Parents must provide informed written consent before their child is assessed or provided with any special education services. Parental consent must be provided before any change in services, and the district must ensure that parents understand proceedings of the IEP team meeting, including arranging for an interpreter for parents with deafness or those whose native language is other than English. So next slide, please. This is really, really important. Like, let's break it down a little bit more. We have the IEP process is really overwhelming. And there's a lot that happens in an IEP meeting. And if all we had to do was give verbal consent, it could be really, really easy for families to actually consent to something that they didn't mean to consent to. The district has to get your written consent in so many different ways. Before they assess your child, you get an assessment plan, you have to sign that. When they hold an IEP meeting, it has to be at a mutual time, a time that's that you're available to. They can't just give you a time and say you have to be there. If it doesn't work, they have to rearrange that. So you don't have to sign that notice of meeting if you don't agree with that time. And then very often you'll get an excusal notice to excuse certain members of the team whose schedules conflict and can't be there. But guess what? If your occupational therapist can't be at your meeting because that time conflicts, they're at another school at that day and time, but handwriting is a huge issue, or sensory, or anything that your occupational therapist works on, you don't have to sign. You don't have to give consent to excuse that person. You can say, wait a minute, let's find a time that works. This person's input is important. I want them to be there. So that's part of this informed consent. You don't have to just sign everything that they put in front of you. You are allowed to disagree, and they're not allowed to retaliate against you for it. And you are allowed to ask for clarifications. If there's something that, is part of the process that you don't understand, absolutely ask. You have the right to understand everything that's happening throughout the process. I can't say that. I can't highlight that enough. And we are lucky in California. Karma talked earlier about the differences between California Ed Code and federal laws like the IDEA in Section 504. There are a couple areas where they're different. We're really lucky in California. We can sign with exceptions. So if you're disagreeing with your team about, I mentioned speech services before, wait a minute, I want multiple sessions of speech services for my child. That's what's appropriate. That's what the best practices are. That's what the American Speech and Hearing Association says. That's what my kid's outside provider says. We've got that we know that's going to provide educational benefit, and the team isn't agreeing. You can sign with exceptions, so you can agree to the rest of the IEP, but say, wait, but we're not in agreement that only one speech session is appropriate. And so you can move forward with the rest of the services, because you want to sign as when you possibly can, because services don't start until you sign to accept them. So if you have this amazing offer that includes a one-to-one paraeducator, and all these other great things, but you disagree about one part of the IEP, well, if you don't sign, they're not going to implement all the great stuff. You've got to sign with exceptions to implement the great stuff while you work on the exceptions. So That's a really important point to make here. And informed consent, they're supposed to send you the procedural safeguards at least once a year. And I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. All right, I'm going to take a breath for a minute because we've been talking at you for 40 minutes now, and it's a lot. And I know you all have heard about FAPE and LRE and child find and meaningful participation and informed consent for a while. Hopefully this is helping take it to that next level of understanding why it's so important. But I'm just going to pause to let it sink in for a minute, and then I'll move on. So now would be a good time, if you've got questions, to put them in the chat. Okay. So the next right is to receive an independent educational assessment. We often call that an IEE, an independent educational evaluation at district expense. That's the key. And this very often goes back to child find. The district has a responsibility to identify students in their geographic boundary that have disabilities. And so if you ask for your child to be assessed and you list all the areas you want them to be assessed, dyslexia runs in my family, please assess for dyslexia. We see characteristics of ADHD. Our doctor's worried about that. Just all the different things. They should give you an assessment plan. You sign it. They should assess for all these things. If they didn't do it, if they didn't give you there's a lot of different reasons why you can disagree. But if there is a substantive reason for disagreement, you have the right to request an independent evaluation at district expense so that you can get the extra data that's needed that the district didn't provide. Now, again, we'll talk more about IEEs next month when we talk about assessments, because just because you disagree with the data doesn't necessarily mean, there's a lot of caveats. It's not just because you request an IEE, you get one. You have to make the case for it, but it is your right. That goes back to, again, FAPE. Also, the F in FAPE is free. You shouldn't have to shell out of pocket $8,000 for a neuropsych assessment because the district didn't give you the information you need to meet their child find obligations. So, like I said, more on that next month. All right, next slide, please. All right, Karma, tag, you're it.
Thanks, Lee. There are some timelines that we want to make sure that you as families are very well aware of in this process. These slides, these timelines in front of you are actually from a law firm that represents school districts in the Bay Area. But it's great information and it's public because it's published on this law firm's website. So if you take a look at the left corner, under initial assessment and IEP development, the school district has to provide an assessment plan 15 calendar days from the time the student was referred for an assessment. What does that mean? It means that after a parent or family member asks the school district to do an assessment for special education, the school district's only response is to send an assessment plan 15 days from the date of that request. Now, in California, this law does allow for the school district to break that 15 days if there is a break, a school break, such as winter break or summer break, of 5 school days or more. And then there are all sorts of funky little timelines depending on when that referral was received and when the school district must hold the IEP afterwards. We'll get more into this next month. The IEP team needing to review initial assessment has to happen within 60 calendar days, or within 30 days to develop the IEP after determining that the student needs special education. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Remember, there has to be at least one annual IEP. Every 12 months, the team must convene and hold an IEP meeting to review the goals and progress and accommodations from the past year and to come up with new goals for the coming year. Just because there's a requirement for one annual IEP meeting, though, doesn't mean a parent is limited to one IEP in the year. A parent can request an IEP meeting anytime they have concerns or questions about their student's education. So those IEP meetings must be held within 30 calendar days after a written request from the parent for an IEP meeting. An IEP meeting to review a student's lack of anticipated progress, no statutory timeline, but again, that falls under parent concerns. So if a parent requests the IEP meeting, within 30 days. An individual transition plan must be held no later than the student's 16th birthday. The transition plan and the transition IEP meeting is to plan for the student's life either after high school or after the age of 22. And then the student has to be informed of their transfer of rights at age 18, unless the student will be conserved by a family member due to disability. Notice to parents of students' graduation from high school with a diploma requires prior written notice. There's those 3 words that we just discussed earlier with Lee. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, here we go. Take another photo if you didn't get one before, but this is one of the most important slides we're showing you, and we're going to be showing it quite a bit the next 3 months. Needs drive goals. Goals drive services. And all of these together will determine the student's placement. Next slide. Here's some more resources for you for San Francisco families, but outside of SFUSD. So from birth to 3 years old, GGRC and the Golden Gate Regional Center. From 3 to 5 years old, families can turn to the Early Childhood Special Education Assessment. And then for private parochial students, there's a special email address and request form for special education. That is the information that is listed here on this slide. Take a photo if you need to. All right, let's move to the next slide. Okay, let's get organized. We've got a short video for you, and we'll take a break from Lee and me talking. Let's go for it.
Sorry, I'm going to share the right. Give me just a second. Oh, sorry, it didn't work here. Just a second. Do you have the link? Maybe I can do it in another.
Do you want me? I could probably screen share it and do it from my end if you want.
Sorry.
No, it is okay. Of course that's how it goes, right?
Yes.
Okay. So give me 1 second. Here we go. All right. Ready? Now let's hope that my audio is set up. Can y'all hear that?
A little bit low.
It's just background music.
Okay.
All right. So part of the reason we show that video is because maintaining an organized IEP binder is so helpful. First of all, when you walk in with that binder, and we always say, instead of just putting the student's name on the front, bring a smiling photo of your kid too. Have that right there in the front. But when you walk in with that organized binder and you've got copies of the IEP, most recent to last recent, and all the documents and the time you communicated with this school, if you can walk in that organized, the team is going to know you mean business. It really helps. And in all honesty, we're having such high turnover in special education. It's such a high burnout field. Even a lot of our case managers and folks who are working with our kids, they might appreciate seeing that detail and that history. How many of us are working with case managers who are brand new to our kid this year and don't have all that history and would love some of the backstory, right? So I would say that it's really, when you're walking into a meeting and there's 10 professionals on the other side of the table, and then there's you and a friend, having that binder, it takes it up to the next level. So, and if anyone needs binders, we have them at Case. We have some of this already set up. We have some of these handouts. You can, again, at the end of the meeting, put your email in the chat and we'll figure out a way to get that to you. So yeah, just one of our pro tips for you there. Next slide, please. Okay. Another shameless plug for the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. One of the things I put into the chat earlier was a letter from the appendix on how to request an assessment if need be. So yeah, okay, I'm catching up on the chat now, and I'm seeing that there wasn't any audio. So for those of you who couldn't hear audio with the video, it was just some cute little music in the background. You didn't miss any words or anything. Just jaunty little music. Okay, so but again, the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual has a lot of great information in it. And the appendix with the sample letters is really, really informative. So next slide. Okay, so just a reminder, this is part 1 of a 4-part series. Tonight is the basics and understanding your rights. We're going to meet again, same time, the 3rd Wednesday of the month in October, and we'll talk about assessments. And that's a much deeper dive. That's a lot of technical information. But really super important to understand all the data in those assessments. Whereas, as we pointed out with that flow chart, needs drive goals, goals drive services, right? So you've got to understand the data and the areas of need in order to get to the goals, and then in order to get to the offer of FAPE. And the reason we point that out as being so important is that's how the IEP teams think. That's how all the professionals think. It is a process. So it's not just one meeting, it's a process. So after the assessments, we go into writing strong IEP goals, and then the offer of FAPE and pulling it together with advocacy strategies. But I know there's a lot of folks who have IEP meetings between now and December 13th. And so there's, it's a long time to wait for some of you. So again, reach out to those parent mentors, reach out at Support for Families, reach out to CASE for a consultation. Next slide, please, Flavia. And we're always happy to help how we can. In the meantime, if you do have an IEP meeting coming up, send an email to your team telling them you're going to be recording that IEP meeting, and take a recording. We've got one of our attendees here who you can see in the chat is using Otter AI to generate captions, but also a transcript. And so we at CASE use Otter AI as well. It's a great way. There's so much that happens in an IEP meeting. It's really hard to listen and participate and take great notes. If you use Otter AI, you've got that transcript. You can go back through and refresh yourself on what happened. It's really, really helpful. But again, California being a little bit different than some other states and some in the federal government, we are a 2-party state, which means you have to give 24 hours notice to your case manager in writing before you can record your IEP meeting. You can't just walk in with the recorder and turn it on and say, I'm recording. You have to give notice. And that varies state by state. So not only do we have the links, but if it's easier, you can just point your camera to the appropriate QR code, and that should take you to the right link as well. So we'll leave it here for a second. Karma, is there anything you wanted to add? Have I missed anything so far?
I think you've pretty much covered a lot of it, Lee. And what I want to say is that I hope everyone here will join us for the next 3 sessions. It's just once a month on Wednesday night from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And we will be continuing this series of trainings with different topics and going a little bit more in depth to some of the topics that we've already discussed here tonight. So we'll be repeating a lot of this information in the next 3 months. So please put these things down on your calendar, register for these trainings, and join us then.
Yep. All right. Next slide, please. And for those of you who haven't heard yet, if you want some more information right now, the San Francisco Unified Special Education Department has put together a brand new special education handbook. Our ombudsperson and many people within the district, many of the parent advisory committees, other community partners, including Support for Families and CASE, have contributed to this. It's available online. It's available in print. The beauty of the online version is there's some spaces where it'll talk about things like prior written notices or goals or whatever the topic may be, and you can click on a link and go deeper. It provides resources from independent agencies. And I have to say, a lot of the information written by school districts is very one-sided, but this is very family friendly. And there are a lot of cases where they actually do point out parents' rights in ways that many other school districts just don't. So I was actually really, really encouraged to read through this and see the final product. It was a lot more family friendly than I've seen, like I said, from most districts. So I give them kudos for this. So next slide, please. And before we get to the Q&A, just wanted to remind you all that you should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. And indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So let's go change the world together. Next slide. All right, so I think we can stop screen sharing at this point. There's been a lot of great stuff in the chat. So we'll pull some of it out. Some of it has already been answered. I've been typing away and Karma's been typing away in the chat, but not everything. Go ahead,
We
Flavia.
have a question in Spanish. I'm going to do interpretation in English just to not change the interpretation services. She's asking about that her daughter has an IEP and it's been like a month that she's not receiving any helping. And is she asking if it's totally fine to it being like a whole month without those services?
No. The easy answer is no. Easy answer. Heck to the no. So, and this was kind of sort of answered in the chat in another question too. Your IEP is a legally binding document. When you get to the point of putting services into the services grid, whether that be specialized academic for reading or math help, behavior support, a one-to-one para, occupational therapy, physical therapy, whatever it is that the team has decided is appropriate. That's your favorite word, appropriate. What is appropriate? FAPE, free, appropriate public education. So it has to be appropriate. But if the team decides it's appropriate and we write it into the services grid and then you sign it, that's a legally binding document. So if they're not providing the services in your IEP, they're not providing FAPE. So Karma, I'll let you take it from here. That's a denial of FAPE.
Yes, and remember, this is a denial of FAPE as long as the parent consented to the IEP. So as long as the parent consented to the IEP and to the services that the parent wants to be implemented, the school district must implement those services immediately upon the parent signing consent. If a parent does not sign consent to those services, a school district should not be providing those services.
Exactly. So then the $1 million question here now, especially when throughout the Bay Area, we're dealing with staffing shortages and staffing crisis. And we know school districts don't have occupational therapists or one-to-one paras or all these other supports and services in place that they need to. So this is part of why making sure you get everything in writing is so important. But once, so we talked about denial of FAPE, right? And we talked a little bit, there are some of the other procedural safeguards that we didn't go into, but you have the right to due process as a parent. It is in the link, so click on that, which means you can file a compliance complaint. You can get an attorney and you can sue. That's really difficult right now and it's a painful process. That's a last resort. We're not telling everyone here, go get an attorney. That's not what we're saying at all. Collaboration, IEPs can be sometimes like marriages where divorce isn't an option, right? Your kids need these services. So how do we work with folks to get these services? So a lot of times when we approach the team saying, wait, this is a denial of FAPE. How do we fix this? What can we do? What can we do to bring in those supplementary aids and services that you've made as part of the offer of FAPE? We can talk about outside agencies. Many districts have contracts with agencies that provide registered behavior technicians, skilled nursing services for our kids whose lives are in danger when they don't have nurses at school. We've got outside tutoring that can be provided if you don't have that reading specialist at school to provide those pull-out services for the dyslexia remediation. There's a lot of different ways that we can talk with our teams about, like, what are we going to do? Compensatory education is something that you hear us talk about a lot as a way to remedy or fix it. But a district doesn't just, an IEP team doesn't just get to say, oops, sorry, we're understaffed. That is true. And we've got a lot of folks in our schools who are working really hard right now and doing the best they can to do the job of 2 or 3 of their colleagues. And we commend them for that. And even with them doing 2 and 3 jobs, it still might not be enough for some of our kids to get the services they need and access their education. And that's no disrespect to the hardworking people who are there doing the job. We can have people who are working hard, and we can have kids who still aren't accessing their education. Both of those things can be true. So denial of FAPE, compensatory education. Did that help answer the question, Flavia?
Yes, thank you so much. I think we have another question regarding transition services. Where can I find more information about what should be included in a transition plan? My son is in 11th grade on diploma track, maybe going to college. All I got was take tours on college in the Bay Area. So with the DSPS office.
Oh, go Karma. I'm going to tag you in.
Thank you, Lee. There are a lot of things that we want to consider in a transition plan. If you look at the actual transition plan itself, it has 3 boxes in it, 3 areas to consider. The first one, what are the students post-secondary? That means after high school, post-secondary plans for educational or vocational training. This is where you would put down goals such as the student will explore 4 colleges or 4 majors that are of interest. The student will research potential careers. The second box is what the student plans to do for work or living or for a career. And this is after the first box, because oftentimes we want students to get the training or the education before they go and find the job or what they need to do for that. So the second box is what sorts of careers does the student want to do? And then there might be an exploration of how is the student going to discover what careers they are interested in? Is it a discussion of what subjects they like and any careers related to those subjects? It could be going out to interview people doing particular jobs that that student might be interested in. But there will be goals, and there can be multiple goals for both post-secondary education, post-secondary employment. The third box is living, an independent living after high school and or transition. And what that means is, yes, where does the student want to live? Oftentimes IEP teams will dismiss that as, oh, well, we don't really need to look at that now. The student's only in high school, or the student told me they want to live with mom and dad. That's cool. No, I'm sorry. We're talking about going to college. We're talking about what does life look like in the dorms? What does it cost to rent an apartment on campus or near campus? What is it going to cost the student to pay in rent or to buy a house in the place where he or she would like to live? There are a lot of questions that go into this. Also, I want to say, with respect to the second box and post-secondary employment, does the student know how to fill out a job application? Have we given the student practice in all of those things? So each of those boxes on the transition plan is just an area of things we need to think about for that student's life after high school. Everything, even things that we as adults are doing, we want our kids to start thinking about that or start getting experience in that as is appropriate for them, right? Not everyone is going to go to college as soon as they're done with their 4th year of high school. That's okay. All of our students are doing what is appropriate for them. Not all of our students are going to go work and find a job as soon as they're done with high school. That's okay. But maybe there are volunteer opportunities or ways that they can go out and do job sites and visit places. Find what is appropriate for that student. Now, as we're considering all 3 of those boxes, think about the different goals that can be written to support the student in each of those 3 areas. And yes, we're talking about the goals that are just like the academic goals or the behavior goals or the language goals that are written into the IEP. Once the student or before the student turns 16, we need to be thinking about these things and expose the student to the possibilities of life after high school. And remember, needs drive goals, goals drive services. These transition goals also fit into that. So when we're looking at goals for transition, we need to assess the student's abilities. And just remember, all of that information from the psychoeducational assessment, the occupational therapy assessment, the speech and language assessment, and more. That information is also helpful if your student is looking and considering what careers they want to pursue, where they want to go to college, what levels of accommodations and services would they need in as disability accommodations at college, and that could lead to a particular career. All of the information we are gathering from kindergarten through 12th grade, that information is to prepare our students to launch into the post-secondary world. So keep that in mind. All of this information, even if your child is in 5th grade or in middle school, we're starting to get information about them that will lead us to consider what will be appropriate for them after high school. Now, all that being said, there are at least 2 other places that parents should be connecting with by the time their student has the transition IEP meeting at the age of no later than the 16th birthday. I'm going to drop them in the chat. And one of them is a place that many of you are familiar with. And that is going to be your regional center if the student has a developmental disability. The other place you will want to have come to these transition meetings is the Department of Rehabilitation. Now, SFUSD and many other school districts actually do invite people from the Department of Rehabilitation and GGRC to the students' IEP meetings. Parents can absolutely request that someone from the Department of Rehabilitation come and attend that meeting. And in fact, the school district should be connecting parents and students with the Department of Rehabilitation at the time the transition plan is put into place. So take all of this back to your case manager and ask them for an IEP meeting with the Department of Rehabilitation and, if appropriate, GGRC or the regional center, so that you can learn more about how to prepare your student for life after high school.
And I do want to point out that many of our high schools actually do have folks working with our students. Like my kids have always gone to Mission High School, and Jewish Vocational Services works with San Francisco Unified. And so they have folks who come into the study skills classes, for example, and they work with kids and help them get part-time jobs or summer jobs or things like that. So there is some career readiness, and we absolutely have the huge opportunity to do more work to prepare our kids for the next step beyond that first part-time job. So that's part of the obligation within the IEP, as we saw in our slides. So, and Support for Families does great transition workshops. There's a transition support group. Reach out if you're looking for more information. There's a couple of folks who really know how to navigate the system at Support for Families and at Case too.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Okay, so there's a few more things that have been in the chat that I think are definitely worthy of calling out, especially since if anyone's watching the recording, they won't necessarily see the chat. Someone was asking about the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP. And I think it's important to note that there's some, if you Google search the difference between a 504 and an IEP, there's some great breakdowns out there. The IEP has more teeth, we say. There's more enforcement mechanisms behind an IEP. There's a tighter timelines. Like Karma talked about the timelines. There's no legal timeline for an assessment. There's no official assessment with a 504 plan. But we have some students who a 504 plan would be appropriate versus an IEP, because the IEP is all about educational benefit. Whereas for many of our students, a 504 plan might be appropriate if they don't need help accessing their education. Maybe they need help accessing the physical building. Maybe it's a student with mobility impairments who's in a wheelchair, and you need to make sure that they have access to the elevator and a key card and things like that. So that might be appropriate for a student who needs nursing services, who has diabetes or asthma, who needs to make sure that the nurse is trained to help intervene if necessary, right? That might be more appropriate for a 504. But when you're talking about educational benefit and struggles in the classroom, then we're talking more about an IEP. It could be either way. We see ADHD. We see 504 plans used to support kids with ADHD, but like I said, the enforcement mechanisms aren't the same. If your IEP isn't being enforced, you can file a compliance complaint. You have due process options. It's not quite as strong of a mechanism to get your 504 plan implemented. So there's not anyway. So that was one of the questions. There's a couple questions about, we covered college, but one of the points to make is when you if you go to college and you've had an IEP through high school, the IEP itself isn't enforced in college. You can take that IEP to your disability services office in college and get similar supports and accommodations and services, but it's not exactly the same. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Go ahead, Karma.
You were leading right into it, Lee. That's right. In school, in high school and below, we have the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And when a student graduates, the graduation and the receiving of the diploma ends the IEP. But that IEP is so important because it documented the student's disability and everything the student needs in school. So we want to make sure that before a student graduates from high school and they're planning to go to college, we have all the disability accommodations that student will need in any educational setting included in that IEP. And the reason is because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, any record of disability immediately makes the ADA applicable, meaning the ADA has to apply to any accommodations or exercise of rights that person takes to college and university. So that's where it's so important to get everything into the IEP by high school. So if the student is going to college or university or even vocational or technical school, the student has a list of documented accommodations to take with them that can be requested at that post-secondary educational institution. And sometimes that student could even take some of those accommodations and have them be at their job or place of employment if they are working or volunteering after high school as well. So remember, the ADA applies after the IDEA ends. And we could go on to the ADA in many other ways, but I'll end it there for tonight.
That could be a whole nother workshop, right? So one of the other questions that I see in the chat here is, okay, well, in many different variations, I feel like a lot of people are experiencing this. Okay, my IEP isn't being implemented. I could maybe get compensatory education. There's a lot of things I could do. How do I start that process? What do I do? And the first step is definitely documenting, put it in writing. Send an email to your case manager, who's your RSP, your special education teacher, and also potentially to the school principal, because the school principal is the LEA rep, the local education agency rep, meaning they're the person who's supposed to know all the services, right? They're supposed to be in charge of implementing the IEP at the school. So that's one way to start. And call an IEP meeting, get it on the record, record the meeting, take good notes, use your Otter AI app to get transcripts, and start calling out that denial of faith and ask them what they're going to do to fix it. And if they actually do, great. If not, then come talk to Support for Families or talk to Case, and we can help you with the next steps. Anything you want to add, Karma? I see you put in the chat, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. We can't emphasize that enough. When you get into the he said, she said, and so many conversations happen that way. Like as you're dropping students off and things are super chaotic, you're at morning circle, dropping your kid off, the principal's dealing with, the chaos of the morning, and you have a conversation and a week later, no one can remember it. So always document, put it in writing, follow up. And especially there are times when people are willing to say things to you that they might not want to put in writing. You can always come home after those conversations and send a follow-up email saying, this is me pretending to type. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that conversation we had in the hallway. Just a recap, I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Blah, 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 whatever it was I said. Thank you so much. I look forward to working with you. Your best friend and favorite parent, your name. Keep it collaborative, of course, always, but make sure you document it. So let's see, I think that was most of the questions in the chat. Did I miss anything? I see a lot of folks asking for binders and slides, so we'll definitely make copies of the of the chat before we leave the meeting, and we'll follow up on that. And then also, please don't forget to fill out the evaluation. As Flavia mentioned earlier, this event is free tonight. Everything Support for Families does is free. Everything Case does is on sliding scale. And this information that we share from you, we share it with our grant funders, and it's part of what helps keep these events free. They want to see that we're out there actually making an impact and helping families. So please, please, please fill out those surveys. That's super helpful.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Chick Fei and Gabriel, our interpreters. Thank you so much. Karma, Lee, this was amazing. We are going to share this information, and please remember that we will have the part 2 of this amazing workshop for series. So October 18, I think it's the date. Please, we are going to talk about assessment. So We hope that everyone can join us. And thank you again, Lee and Karma, for being here and always support our community. Please fill out the evaluations and we'll see you next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here.